Welcome, friends. Welcome to the International Brotherhood of Magicians official podcast. My name's Jason Michaels, joined by my co-host Ben Young, Scott Cantrell. Good to see you, fellas. How are you?
Hi,
Hi,
good to
we're
be
good.
here.
All right, well, good. I don't want to waste any time because we have a special guest, and I'm going to be honest with you. I'm not quite sure how we got this lucky to get this special guest. This is a legendary special guest. This is one of those that if you said to me, hey, can we get him for the podcast? I'd be like, he doesn't even know who we are. So, but I'm so excited to be able to introduce to everybody, all our listeners and everybody watching, the legendary Michael Close. Michael, welcome to the
Hey,
podcast.
hey, thank you. Pleasure to be here. I figured out the legendary thing. It's simply age. That's
It's just an
simply it.
age
I
thing.
mean,
That's
you just live long enough, and all of a sudden, you're legendary. I
you have
heard.
a you have a legendary career, Michael. Look.
Oh,
No, I'm
if
serious.
if the new definition of legendary is non-profitable, then my status is hugely up there. I've told people, I do close-up magic. I play jazz piano. If I had only minored in Sanskrit, I would have hit the trifecta of unemployability. So, but the other word that gets tossed around, and I think David Corsero used it, was genius, which I do not consider myself that at all. I tend to think of genius as some innate thing that you were born with, and like you're Mozartian, and doing this at 6 or 7 or 8 years old, and in nothing that I've ever done in my life have I ever been a prodigy at it. It's just all kinds of stumbling around, and some stuff sticks and some stuff doesn't stick, and so you ramble on and you outlive everybody else, and pretty soon you're legendary. You're a legendary genius.
A legendary.
So,
You know what? Here's one more word: prolific. And let me say
Yeah.
why prolific. Okay. First off, uh, I knew that. So the Workers series.
hmm
You are the creator. You are the author of the Workers series. And when I was a younger magician, and I have the Workers series like comb bound behind me
oh,
in the yeah. And so like I remember buying these early on and reading them, and they had these essays in them, and it's just like the stuff you were talking about was. I mean, it spoke to me because it was like interesting plots, talking about story, talking about being able to hook people with with not just technique. And so you were talking about all of these really interesting things, and I want to talk about that. But also, like, you were one of the pioneers of ebooks when everybody was still like writing
yeah,
books and stuff like that. You
yeah.
were saying, hey, there's a better way to learn. We can include video and stuff. So you've published all this stuff. You've been out, you've lectured all over the world. Like, and so we're just super excited to have you.
Oh, well, thanks. It's funny about the ebook thing, the resistance that so many people have against that. And, I understand that because, when the Gutenberg press showed up, all the guys were going, well, what am I going to do with my scroll table? I had this 12-foot table built just so I can undo my scrolls. And when I unload, when I lay them out there, man, there's a sense of when I was a kid in my parents' home, I was surrounded by scrolls. And now I've got this thing that I can hold. But the real the real reason that I felt that the ebook thing was important, and we were not the absolute first. The very first one was Chris Washuber did an electronic version of Card College,
Mm.
and the text was exactly the same. And what they did was add video clips to it. But
Okay.
my books were the first that were written from the ground up with the intention of combining illustrations, text, and video. And as I've mentioned it, when you write, when you incorporate that technology, it changes how you write the book, because
Hmm.
I literally do not have to describe something, especially actions through three-dimensional space, where I could just say, look at this video, and it really helps. But then again, the problem with the electronic medium is you don't get the satisfaction of unwrapping the latest shipment, taking out the book you've been waiting for, and immediately putting it on your shelf and never looking at it again. So, you are deprived of that particular satisfaction.
I feel like I
And
should pull some of these books with plastic off my shelf and be like, "You mean like this right here?"
well,
Like couple.
I edited MUM, the Society of American Magicians magazine, for 9 years, and I know for a fact that there are members of that organization who died, and when people came to visit the widow and buy stuff, buy the magic collection, there were a stack of MUMs still in the plastic, that they
Mhm.
never
Yep.
opened up. So, it's there's no there's a limited amount of fantasy that comes with owning an ebook. You can own a hardback book and look at that thing and fantasize that you have read it and you know that stuff.
Mhm.
But besides the technical teaching, I guess the whole point is that I think what's most important to me, and especially at this time in my life when I no longer really have the energy or the inclination to walk table to table going, did someone lose a red knife? No, it's a white knife. No, it's a white. No, it's a brown knife. I'm the magician. Um, that I think what I think I best serve the magic community by teaching, and I mean really teaching. Um, so that's what those ebooks are all designed for, was actually getting you to be able to perform this stuff. And I was going to say to you, though, Jason, that by having those spiral bound copies of the workers, you have my DNA, because I bound all of those back in the day.
Oh,
I was
that's
down in
cool.
my basement with a binding machine. And so, if you do that, you can scrape some stuff off and make another one of me. I cannot possibly envision a benefit to doing that, but there it is,
The
available.
legend continues.
The legend continues.
Right.
So,
Yeah, you won't
so
be saying that once my head's in a jar, pal. I'll tell you.
So here's what, before we dive too deeply into this, because like there's so many credits from Illusions Magic Lounge to, was it called the Houdini Lounge? Is that what it was called?
The
The
Houdini
Monte,
Lounge in the
the
Monte
Houdini.
Carlo, I was there for a few years. Yeah.
And then, over the last, whatever, 10 years, whatever it has
Yeah.
been, you've been involved as the magic. Well, describe it as far as how describe your
Well,
fullest position.
I guess I'm now considered magic producer / consultant.
Okay.
Obviously, Johnny Thompson was the main guy. Johnny did the first season of Fool Us that was shot in England. And then when they moved it, when the CW network wanted more episodes and they decided to shoot it in Las Vegas, I had worked with Penn and Teller when I lived in Vegas. I was in Vegas for about 10 years. And so I knew their style and they knew what I could do. And Johnny and I worked very well together. So they brought me on in season 2. So we didn't do a season last year. But it's been 11 years since I started with the series.
Wow. Wow, that's something else. So, okay, now I will point out that this podcast, while it is the I.B.M official podcast, we have folks who listen to the podcast who aren't full-time magicians. We have some folks who are just like magic enthusiasts and beginner magicians. So, would you, because I really want people to kind of understand a little bit about you, would you sort of describe your style of performing, the style of magic that you liked, the style of magic that you created? Because I feel
Sure.
like your style was a little bit different than just here's a trick, here's a trick, here's a trick.
Well, yeah. I had two major influences. Um, One was a guy named Dick Stoner, who is still around. Dick Stoner owned a
Oh,
magic shop
yes.
in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Dick is still
Yep.
around.
Yep.
And we lived in Fort Wayne for a while when I was a little kid. As a matter of fact, I think for my 6th birthday, my folks took me to Stoner's Magic Shop and I bought a couple of little tricks. Just one of them, just I threw out just recently. I mean, within the last 10 years or so that I've kept it. Um, Dick was a fantastic magic dealer because he never sold me anything that was beyond my ability to handle. And so that was absolutely great. But the main thing about Dick to me was how funny he was. I have a memory, and of course, you know, memory is a very fragile and deceptive thing. But I think I might have been in kindergarten, and he did a show for my school, and I still remember seeing him do the hippity hop rabbits, which killed me as a kid, and just how much everybody laughed when he performed. Now, I admit that I have a penchant for those people who do the things that I like to do, and they're funny while they do it. So with piano players, I love Victor Borga and Pete Barbuti and Tom Lehrer with his, you know, his satirical songs and what have you, Steve Allen. And so the thought of being able to be funny while you did magic really appealed to me. And then I really saw almost no other magicians. We moved from Fort Wayne to a little town called Lebanon, Indiana, which is just about 20 minutes northwest of Indianapolis. And I really didn't meet another magician until I was 20 years old, like 1972, something like that, when I discovered, having left attending Purdue University as a mathematics major and going to Indianapolis and being a music major, then I found out there was a magic club in West Lafayette, which I had no idea about. So instead of having it right there where I could have hung out with guys, it was a 45-minute drive up to hang with them. But through that, and actually through the I.B.M. ring in Indianapolis, I met Harry Reiser. And I was well read. I was extremely well read. As a kid, we didn't have a lot of money. And I decided pretty early on that I could buy a trick for $10, or I could buy a book for $10 and a 50-cent pack of cards and have 60 tricks that I could work on. And since I had some digital dexterity, having been playing the piano, my mom was my first piano teacher, and then little blue-haired ladies in the town where we grew up, you know, I wasn't afraid of learning sleight of hand. And so I read everything, absolutely everything I could get my hands on. I'd order all these books from Stoner's Magic Shop and read them and pour through them. So consequently, the combination of being well book read and developing some at least intermediate chops, when I did some stuff for the I.B.M. guys, when I found out there were actually meetings of magicians in Indianapolis, one of them said, "Wow, you ought to meet Harry Reiser." And I thought, wow. I mean, I knew he was still around, but I thought he was in Chicago because I was associated him with Ed Marlowe. And he did used to live in Chicago, but he had moved to Indianapolis. And that's when I really began to get my education of what magic was supposed to look like. Because Harry was a student of Vernon and a student of Charlie Miller, great friends with both of those. A guy named Stuart Judah, who is not well remembered now, which is unfortunate, a great Cincinnati magician. And so with Reiser, the thing about Reiser was when he did a trick and he finished, your only thought was, but he didn't do anything. And I thought, oh, okay, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. And then if there was any, a big unique aspect to the stuff I came up with, because I started coming up with stuff that I would use in the restaurants in 1978. That's when I took my first restaurant gig. I didn't want to didn't want to do magic for money because I knew what changed when you did music for money. And then all of a sudden, the thing you love becomes, I don't want to play Proud Mary anymore. Or, you know what I mean? It's that kind of a thing. But a very nice guy who died very young, unfortunately, a guy named Steve Scomp, was working at a place called Max and Irma's. I don't even know if that chain exists anymore. And he was moving to the West Coast, and he said, "You want to take over this gig?" And I said, "Boy, I don't know." But I did, and I did enjoy it. But, you know, there comes that great revelatory moment when you walk into the gig on the first night and discover that nothing in your repertoire works in that venue. You can't sit down. You have no table space. You have no time to reset complicated tricks. And that was really the beginning of the workers material, because I had to figure out how to do this stuff in the real world. As far as the really unique approach to things, when the Illusions restaurant opened in '88, it was the first time I'd been in an environment where lots of other magicians were working at the same time you were. And I didn't want to do anything that they did. So that was a great help right there, because all of a sudden, sponge balls, ambitious card, everything that anybody else might use, I wasn't going to do. And so that, I started thinking about that way of approaching the development of routines. What was the question?
We were talking about how you developed your style, but
Oh yeah,
you know,
that was it.
that's what's interesting about that is that it feel okay, maybe I'm just crazy, but it feels to me, I know you've been into magic for a while, but it still feels for you to say to yourself, I don't want to do any magic that any other people are doing. That just feels to me like such a super, super advanced way of thinking, especially if you hadn't been like doing it full time all the time just for years and years and years and years and years. Was that where did that come from? That idea that I want to be doing original material, or at
Well,
least material that isn't seen very often.
yeah, well, part of it was that magicians for the most part are lazy. It's unfortunate, but for most part they are. So they see something that somebody else does that gets a reaction, and they say, I want to do that. Now, this is
Hmm.
not a condemnation of hobbyists or anybody else. This is a condemnation of greats, like all the people who ripped off sawing a lady in half.
Yeah.
This is not new to the world of magic. Somebody does the thing, and everybody goes, well, I want to do that trick. And so I thought, there's all these thousands upon thousands of interesting ideas, interesting concepts, tricks that have been thought out to a certain point, but haven't been that extra little bit that makes it absolutely practical to do. Part of it may have come from my musician training, which is that, if you're learning a piece and 3/4 of the way through it, there's a passage that you can't quite play. If you don't sit down and devote a lot of time and energy to those 8 measures, then every time you play it, you're going to hit that rough road, and it's not going to be a piece of music anymore. And the same thing with a magic trick. I really wanted to see if I couldn't smooth out the rough edges of things. An example of that, and because if you look at what I've published, and I am not by any extent prolific, and I'm not prolific because I don't invent tricks just to sell the magicians. Everything I publish is something I've used. Now, that doesn't quite hold as much now because I'm not performing as much, but when I do come up with the stuff I come up with now, I know what the parameters and the criteria are if I was going to use it in the real world, and I designed the trick that way. But for example, Paul Harris, in his very first book, had a great little trick called flash fold. I only thought of this because I was talking about this with somebody else the other day. And flash fold is a trick where you have some business cards, and a spectator initials the top one, and it vanishes and appears folded inside a matchbox. Now, the problem with that trick is that the card is pre-folded, and the cards have been cut so there's a little space, and then a rubber band hides the cut edges. So you've got this rubber banded stack of cards, but you look at it and you go, well, there's all this surface area of this card, and I have to have you initial in the corner?
Hmm.
That makes no sense to me whatsoever. So really, my main addition to that trick was to justify a very illogical procedure. And then I smoothed out a couple of the moves a little bit and added this pattern scheme that tied everything together. But that's the kind of thing that I have done. I mean, I've really I mean, the Frog Prince is an original approach, although it's merely a 2-card transposition. All I've done is made it very easy to keep track of which card is where by folding it into a different shape. I'll tell you, remind me to tell you something interesting about the Frog Prince. What else is like that? That one is fairly original. There was another one. Oh, the dollar bill trick with the toothpick. I called it Rubik's dollar bill, where the center drops. That fold works. So I have things like this, but a lot of what I have worked on is, as a starting point, is somebody else's creation, and I've simply tried to polish off all the rough edges. And that holds now. Jason knows because he has worked with me on Fool Us, and Ben, who knows as well. Much of what I do when I work with the performers who've been booked for the show is to find those rough edges and get rid of them before you go on TV. And as you were talking with David Corsero, sometimes it's a perfectly fine trick in the real world, but when you put it on TV and draw a box around it, all your misdirection disappears, and moves that work great don't work at all. And that's always a challenge to figure out how to, find your way around that.
Yeah, I remember that when we were I remember that when we were first talking, where you were like, you basically said what you just said there. Hey, the moment that you have the unblinking eye of a camera, what would work perfectly fine in the real world may not pass muster. And that's why, yeah, it was very fun to get to work with you on that. Now I feel like I totally could like hijack this whole conversation, so I definitely want the other guys to jump in here as well. So fellas, join the convo.
Go for it.
Totally.
Well,
I totally wasn't thinking you were going to hijack it. Well, and it's something that I experienced too, working with you on Fool Us. What I had submitted was kind of the bare bones of an idea that I had done for audiences a few times, and it got a good reaction. But then you came and said, well, here we can pump up the magic. And you ended up adding, a visual magic moment to something that was just a mentalism routine, with a reveal that is very common these days and wasn't as common then. People can watch my spot and they'll know. But what I wanted to, we were talking about like your style developing, but one of the things that's so, okay, we haven't used the word iconic yet today, have we?
That's a good choice. Good choice.
So iconic is that
I'm going to need to get a bigger hat.
Yes, you will. Is that you have really interesting presentations that go with the magic. So the magic is strong, but you have fun premises. And it's funny that you mentioned like the Paul Harris trick, because I think of them kind of like, I think of you two sort of similarly, that you have these sort of like out there presentations, but then you stick the landing with strong magic. How did that sort of like whimsy kind of get incorporated into the magic? I mean, doing things like, an origami frog and Big Surprise, which is very, very much slept on, and things like that. You have these fun presentations.
Pothole trick. I mean,
the pothole trick.
But see, all of these, as you look at it after the fact, you go, where in the world did that come from? But each of them has a very easy answer for that, and none of them were. Let's see. I don't want to forget the order of them. So it's the pothole, the frog, and what was the other? Oh, the big surprise. Yeah. Okay, so let's take the pothole first. So Michael Weber in 1984 stays with me in Indianapolis for a couple of days before we go off to work the Norfolk convention, the I.B.M. convention in Norfolk that year. And he shows me his trick, 1-2 punch. And 1-2 punch is in Lifesavers, and the method is exactly that of the pothole trick in terms of the preparation of the two tickets. It was it was almost like raffle tickets. In the presentation, Michael talks about them as if they're theater tickets. And his rationale for punching a hole in the ticket was that if each one gets punched, then if you take the hole off one of them and put it on the other, you've got a ticket that you can use to get back into the movies again. So, with Michael, he's always looking for a real world analog to the thing that he's using, because if you can find that, if you can find something that people can relate to as part of their lives, then they will get more emotionally invested in the trick. And so Michael shows me this trick, and he completely fooled me with it. I had no idea how it worked. But I thought and then when he explained it, I went, oh, I'm going to do that with potholes. Right then, it was not a Mozart moment. It was because Indiana has a whole bunch of crappy potholes, because it freezes and thaws and freezes and thaws, and the things break up. And, I knew instantly how I wanted to do that trick. I knew that I wanted to use that stack of cards where I drew a spectator's map. I mean, that just all popped in right away. So I can't explain that. That just showed up. But that presentation of potholes was simply taking what Michael's idea was and applying it to something that was occurring in my life, which is why that trick immediately relates to the audience that you're working for. Now, to temper my genius with some sobering reality, I spent 4 years trying to figure out how to find business card stock that would conceal the work that you have to put into those business cards until the day Illusions opened, the absolute morning of the day that Illusions opened, when I realized all I had to do was crosshatch in the streets. Yeah, I think we can kick genius off of the list of adjectives there. So that's why that happened. The Frog Prince came about because my mom had a book called The Reader's Digest Book of Hobbies and Crafts. And there was a chapter on origami, which had been a hobby of mine since I was a kid. I always liked paper folding things. I don't do it at all now, really, but it was something that I spent a lot of time, I was very interested in. And there was a method for folding a jumping frog from an index card. And all I thought was, boy, I bet you could do that with a playing card. And not only is it cuter than with an index card, because the index card has greater length, so it looks like a very long frog. This looks like quite a cute frog. And then it was simply a matter of figuring out a method, which was not an instantaneous process, because I came up with the Frog Prince idea in 1978. And it wasn't until almost 1988, when I learned Juan's double crossing the gaze switch, that I could do it in a way. What I used to do is, remember I do the thing about stupid pet tricks, and he jumps around, and I'd say, it does tricks too. Stand on your head. Good. Play dead. And I turn it over, and then I'd shoot it off the table. I go, commit suicide. And it'd jump it off the table. And I'd switch frogs as I brought it back up and put it on the très elegant. I know everybody's thinking, très elegant. What a beautiful method. So that's how that came about. And it was very, very mundane, very prosaic. And then, of course, once you have a frog and you think Frog Prince and you think fairy tale, then all those pieces kind of come together. And for the big surprise, the problem with the big surprise is, I mean, it was very popular, the idea of card in box, and everybody was doing that kind of thing. But card in anything, folded up card in anything, has an inherent flaw if you look at it and you say to yourself, how would this look if I had the power of a real magician? Well, I don't have a box or something, but if I open this thing, this cup, it has a lid, and I tip it, and the spectator's card, they see a playing card folded up inside, I should hold it out and dump it into the spectator's hand, shouldn't I?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
There is no reason whatsoever for this to go into my hand to go into your hand.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem that I think completely makes almost all these methods, no matter, no offense to the guys who have spent time and money developing these things that make whatever's in here disappear.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
That's not what the problem is with the trick. That's not what the problem is. The problem with the trick is me doing this into my hand. Other solutions existed. Scotty York also thought about this. Now, Scotty worked behind a bar, and he used to do a trick where the card is supposed to appear here, and instead it's the watch works. The part, inside of his pocket watch. He wore a pocket watch that was hooked on a chain that he kept in his vest pocket. And so he'd take it out and pop the lid of the pocket watch, and there's a folded up card in it.
Nice.
But Scotty's behind the bar, and the chain is of limited length.
Mm-hmm.
He can't
Nice.
dump it into the spectator's hand because he can't reach her. So this, this makes complete sense. it makes complete sense. And then I saw Jamie Swiss do a trick called the Kiss of the Big Apple, which was the same kind of a thing, except he had a brass shaped thing that looked like an apple that he took the lid off. It was filled with candy kisses. And he'd swirl it around, and you realized that within the swirl of candy kisses was a folded up card. And then he dumped the last of them into his hand. And I was really, I found the illusion of other things coming out of the container when you did the switch was very appealing. I thought, well, that looks absolutely great. So then I started to think, well, what else could I use in the canister that I could dump out? And it occurred to me, if what was in the canister was something that belonged to me, and I was surprised that it was in there, then I was perfectly justified to dump it into my own hand, because one of those two things is mine. So that's part of the rationale of how this developed. The other was that the other problem is this, and this is a problem inherent, and I'll get back to the frog prince in a moment, because this will lead us back to this. The minute you have a playing card signed, the spectators know something interesting is going to happen at the end, because otherwise, why did you have it signed? So, there's just a heightened suspicion at that moment of time. But I thought, what if the thing that ends up in the canister, they've already forgotten about by the time the revelation comes? So this is where everything showed up. I have the canister at the beginning of my stand-up show. The lady comes up. You're going to be the caretaker of the big surprise canister. I need you to sign this contract. And I've got lots of little jokes with the contract. She signs the contract. She takes the canister back. I put the contract into my coat, and it's already folded vertically into quarters in that simple action right there. And now I got 45 minutes to get it from here into my pants pocket and then into my hand. And by then, you don't even remember it exists. So, after she goes down and I do my first trick, I've moved my briefcase over to the side where I used to keep all my props, and the pen falls on the floor, and I can't find the pen cap. So now at the end, I look for it and I go, well, I'll get it later. Not a big deal. So now at the end, when she takes the lid off the canister and I'm holding it and she looks inside, I say, how many objects in there? She says, 2. 2? She says, yeah. I go, what color are they? She says, there's something white and something black. I go, black? What's the black thing? Oh, and I said, what's the white thing? She says, looks like a folded up piece of paper. I said, what's the black thing? She says, it's the cap to your pen. I go, no shit. And there's the switch. And there's the switch. Now, pardon my French, but I always delivered the line that way, because the rest of my show was pretty much squeaky clean. Consequently, it sounded real. It sounded like I was genuinely surprised that that was in there. And see, now the switch is done, and you still don't know what this piece of paper is until she starts to unfold it. So this is, now I realize, somebody who only is mildly interested in magic goes, is there a soccer game on? Why are we? But there is also an aspect to this, because I really deeply want to fool you to death. I absolutely want to fool you to death. And, my reasoning behind this is, and it's interesting to me when guys go, oh, I don't try to fool them. I just try to entertain them. Now, forgive me for using that accent, but it just completely feels right. It just feels like that's the way that would probably be expressed. I don't try to fool them. I don't try to fool them. I just entertain them. And I go, oh, okay, then please scratch magician off your business card. Because if they are not fooled, if you do not do things that have no explanation, then you're not a magician. And if you deeply, deeply fool people, they will come back to see you again. So if you're at a restaurant or someplace where you're there, a couple times a night or once, a couple times a week or once a week or whatever, they will come back to get another shot at you because you really deeply fooled them. And to wrap up whatever this question was, people have, one thing that I find gratifying is that there have been very few people who have improved anything that I've created in a way that I thought was actually moving a trick forward and not moving it sideways. And I think that's simply, credit to the amount of work that I put into trying to make it as seamless as possible. With the Frog Prince, which is the one that seems to have endured the most variation, it's almost all sideways. So you have to remember, I invented this trick to do in a restaurant so it would reset immediately. And it took about 2.5, 3 minutes to perform it. Well, Jorge Blas, wonderful magician, turned it into a stage trick, did it on Fool Us, where now you need an assistant dressed as a prince, a giant prop of a picture frame, a live frog, a deck that is gaffed beyond belief. Well, that moves it this way. That's okay. Another fella had a version where he felt that the card needed to be signed. And so he tried to figure out a way to fold the card with one hand into quasi frog shape, which he has to do with one hand in his lap, sitting at a draped table, and the trick takes 9 minutes. Well, that doesn't move it even this way. That moves it, way back the other way. Just recently, Mayor Yedid was selling some things. They were pre-scored playing cards that were scored with the creases that show up when you do so that you could actually fold it one-handed. And I go, why? Why? You can't do it without being seen. I mean, yes, you can do it fairly quickly, but that hand's got to go someplace where nobody's looking. So, but the reason you don't want to have the card signed is the minute it's signed, people know something really interesting is going to happen to it. And I do not want you to think that with this trick. The last thing I want you to suspect is that the frog is going to end up being your card. If it's signed, they're going to get way too far ahead of you. There is an aspect of the Frog Prince that nobody has really thought about, and I've been thinking about it for 40 years and finally solved the problem. So now that trick is as good as I can possibly make it. And
Wow.
I'm not going to discuss it. I'm working on a new book. It's called Things Change, Close
Nice.
2.0, which I think is a pretty cool title. And I'm going to go back and look at some stuff that I've been thinking of. And the new work on the Frog Prince, it does not add a single extra thing to the trick. Well, I mean, in terms of technical difficulty or anything like that. It just makes something so that in your memory of the trick, as you recall the trick, I can lean into some things that I haven't been able to lean into before. So, and that's how I think about tricks. What was the question?
The question was, how did you become so iconic? And then you told us exactly how. I just think it's very cool that, I mean, you gave some really great examples of like that these all come from solving problems, like really logical problems that you're just trying to solve. But you also have a willingness to be whimsical, like with the presentation. I think a lot of magicians, they wouldn't want to do something with a frog. They'd want it to be folded in quarters, or they don't want to do a story about potholes.
And here's an aspect of this I think that's really important. Illusions was a very good place for more whimsically oriented magic because it was a magic themed restaurant. You don't go to a magic themed restaurant and expect it to be the most serious place. It's not a Christian Science reading room. It's a magic themed restaurant. Possibly less deception, but it is a magic themed restaurant. So a lot of what the pattern for my tricks, the way they start is not to be whimsical, but to be truthful. And this is the thing that I point out all the time. If you can embed a nugget of truth from your personal experience into the way you present a trick, it will not only sound genuine when you do that trick for people, but nobody else can copy it because the words will not sound right coming out of their mouths as it sounds coming out of yours. So, Dr. Strange trick from Workers One, the card warp thing using the dollar bill. Well, origami is a hobby of mine. every table that I work, and on the rare occasions when I still do some magic for real people, I always use the origami bunny that's in Workers One. I always use that. And that leads into me talking about origami, in which I can truthfully say origami is a hobby of mine. And, you know, I was in Japan and I met this guy who was great at it. And he had a way of folding this 100 yen note, and we're off to the races. And you don't realize that the only truthful thing in that sentence is origami is a hobby of mine. And everything else is a lie. But that's enough to hang the truth on. You know,
This speaks to me so much. Jason probably realizes, as Jason and a lot of my other friends know, I take forever to work on new material because it's not enough for me to just like the trick. I have to have the one little hook that ties it into something that I can kind of feel, within me. And I believe, and you guys can say too if you agree, but it resonates with audiences. They feel like they actually get to know you
oh,
because you
absolutely.
have that little nugget that, and then you can lie the rest of the time, but it's enough. It's enough to get you through it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, um, you know, years ago, I mean, years and years ago, in the 80s probably, I was doing a lecture for the Indianapolis IBM ring, I think. And I did a trick, and I don't remember what exactly I was doing, but I used Irish pennies. And I liked Irish pennies because they're just goofy and they've got a harp on one side and a chicken on the other, and they're really, you know, it's a goofy looking prop. And I found, and I somehow had found this little beaded purse, and it was, you know, not, it's just big enough to hold change, to hold coins, but it looked like somebody had put beadwork on it, you know, and done this thing. And I told this whole story when I started the trick about the fact that this is my grandmother's purse. She was Irish, and she had these pennies in it. And so I'll show you these Irish pennies. They're kind of big. Anyway, so I'm explaining the trick, and I say, you know, so I like to, the reason I use this purse is so I could, and I don't use one of those fancy leather purses that coin guys use, because I can talk about this, you know, that this was my grandmother's purse, and it gives me a hook into it. And a guy says to me, well, you could use the leather purse and just lie about that. And I looked at him and I said, I'm lying about this. This is not my grandmother's purse. So anyway, if you can find that hook, if you can find that thing that allows the spectators to relate what you are doing to something they have gone through, then you will have made a huge jump in connecting with your audience when you do these magic tricks. The greatest success I've had with a more recent thing, and it's not even, it's about almost 10 years old now, I guess, is a trick called the IKEA card trick. It's in the second Paradigm Shift ebook. And it's basically just a trick called Vernon's Variant, which was in Ultimate Secrets of Card Magic. And it's a do as I do trick. The spectator gets 4 cards, you have 4 cards. They follow along with the procedure that you're doing. Your cards are always all face down at the end. The lady helping you always has one face up. Terrible plot for a trick. Why? Because she looks stupid over and over and over again. Well, I presented as the IKEA card trick. And so the lady and I are trying to put together IKEA furniture.
Great.
And we try it 3 times, and each of the phases is related to what you find on the instructions that come with IKEA furniture. I have in my life never seen a trick where in the first few words you speak, every single person watching goes, oh, I've been there. Yep. I've been there. I've been there. And more important than that, it never makes the lady feel stupid because it's never her fault.
Right.
First of all, it's the fault that I talked as we did it. But IKEA instructions do not have don't have written words. It's all done with diagrams. So we do it again, and it's just diagrams. You know, I have her follow whatever the pose that I'm in, and it still doesn't work. And it didn't work because there's 2 important little diagrams on the IKEA thing. One shows a little man sitting on his floor with these pieces of furniture trying to put together, and there's thunderstorms outside, and there's a bottle of Jim Beam and the suicide prevention hotline number next to him. And then because he's trying to put it together himself, all by himself. And in this other little drawing, there's a couple, and there's rainbows, and there's, unicorns crapping Skittles, and it's beautiful because they are putting it together. And I say to her, you and I put it together simultaneously, but individually. And now we're going to put it together. So now we hit this interchange of things going on as we do it, and it still doesn't work. And there's a huge kicker at the end to explain why it didn't work. But this is the kind of thing that if you can find somehow, now, here's the drawback. The handling of that trick is based on a thing that Tono Nasaka, who we miss, and it's so, he was such a giant. I saw him do 15, maybe almost 20 years ago at this point in time. And I thought, well, that's the way to do the trick. But he still hadn't solved the insulting the spectator part of it, making the spectators feel foolish part. And it took me 15 years to come up with that presentation. And the reason I came up with it is my wife and I had moved, and we had taken apart and put together and taken apart and put together all this stuff. And we damn near killed ourselves through the experience. And that became the trick. That's now, great. By the way, for those who are listening, this is why those of us who pride ourselves on coming up with original material get so pissed off if you see it and you think that gives you the right to perform it. You haven't paid that price. You haven't paid that price. I had a presentation at the Houdini Lounge of Dean Dill's box, the Dean's box trick. And I had some mild work on the trick, but I had a good presentation and a few interesting things. And I did it for a couple of guys. They were from Texas, magicians. And one saw me finish it and did it and goes, man, that is a great routine. That's the way I'm going to do it from now on. And I went, I'm sorry. Did something about my act scream the word smorgasbord to you? This is not something that I said, no, you're not going to do it. I mean, I got pretty angry about it because they just don't understand. This is also why I tell anyone who has something that they don't want anybody to know about, do not do it for anyone at a magic convention. The only things you perform in front of people at magic conventions are things you are selling or that you don't care if they go away from you. So,
okay, so here's what's interesting. So
out of all that, here's what's interesting. Well,
out of all that, yeah. Now, here's where it feels to me this naturally.
You should have said, I think what Mike's trying to say is.
But I feel like the natural next step is because I know that you teach, so for instance, after we worked together on Foolish, I was working on a trick, and so I reached out to you and I said, hey, or can you help me with this? And you say, hey, I'm available for lessons and stuff like that. And so I hired you to help me work on this specific magic trick I was working on. And I know that this is something that you do. This is one of the ways that you're able to share your theory, your philosophies, and what. So, but tell us more about that. How are you teaching magicians to be better magicians nowadays?
All right. It's an interesting thing. Since day one of the Workers series, in every single thing I've ever written, and in the write-up of particular tricks, I've always tried to explain not just the how of the trick, but the why of the trick. What is it why did I make the decisions I made? Why did I make the choices that I made? What did I find unsatisfactory in my opinion, a definitely subjective opinion that I felt need to be fixed? And that information is all in there. But here's the problem. And I mentioned this earlier. Everything I've ever come up with was designed for me, not to sell to you, but designed for me. And I have a particular toolbox. I have a particular skill set, which is a fairly highly refined skill set at this point in time because I didn't mind practicing. I put in the time and I worked on moves. So consequently, if you're faced with a trick of mine and it uses procedures that you are not comfortable with, that are not in your wheelhouse, that you have to learn in order to do this trick, then you're going to devote yourself to the how as you're spending time with that trick, because you want to learn to do this thing. Well, once you accomplish the how, you're probably going to close the book.
Exactly.
And you're not going to go back and go, well, I guess I better reread this to make sure I understand why.
Yeah.
I understand. See what I mean?
Yep.
So consequently, all that information is out there, but I don't think it's being absorbed. So I thought to myself, would it be possible to construct a pedagogically sound course in magic where I could actually take someone who has been interested in magic, perhaps, but who has never picked up a deck of cards to do a trick with it, and in 6 weeks get them to a point where they not only could do a couple of really interesting 2 and 3 trick sets with both cards and coins, but if it wasn't that difficult to get the how under your fingers, it would be easier for me to impart the why. And so that's where this course came up. And it's called, the whole thing is called the Workers Course, which, by the way, is a word that I should have trademarked back in 1991. Why I didn't trademark that stupid word is just one of the biggest mistakes in my life. I mean, I didn't come up with the term, but by golly, I must have popularized it, because every single trick that's getting sold nowadays is a worker. And I go, oh, okay, I don't know by whose criteria that's a worker, but if it makes you happy to call it that, that's fine. So this was difficult for me, and it was really difficult because it was not the way I was taught. Nobody sat me down and for lesson number 1, Magic Week, this is what we're going to do. And lesson number 2, we're going to learn to do this. I read everything I could get my hands on. And then when I got to the point when I met people who were better than me, I shut up and listened and paid attention and tried to absorb as much as I could. So it was just a cruel. It wasn't, it's different than learning to play an instrument. I mean, the great thing about, if you want to learn to play an instrument, is for 300 years, people have been writing books of instruction so that you learn it in the most efficient way possible. Most magic books tell you how to do something, a sleight. How do you do this sleight? This is how you do this sleight. Do-do-dum, and this happens. How do you learn how to do that sleight? Well, who writes that? Almost nobody. Almost nobody. And so, and I've got a picture of me in our hallway with Post-it notes. Everything I thought that might be important to talk about, I slapped it on a Post-it. And so we had this wall full of Post-it notes, and then trying to figure out a structure and figure out, well, is this too much? Is this enough? Can we go from here to here? And so now we have this course, and I've had people who know nothing about magic, who've gone through it and understood everything, and they have tricks they can use. I have people, my friend Tim Trono, used to work for Murphy's, works for Penguin now. He's been in magic 50 years, and he is either learning something he'd never thought of before, or nobody had ever told him, or he's being reminded of stuff that he had learned and forgotten.
Yep.
And so what I'm really trying to do with this course is, it's not important to me if you do the tricks that I explain. That's fine. They are mainly there because they're simple enough that you can learn them in a week. You can perform them without having to construct intricate presentations. They are all done with normal props, borrowed decks of cards, $50 if you have them. I mean, the $50 is about the only thing that isn't a common object, that you would have to carry on your person, but you can do things with quarters or stuff like that. And that you will be able to walk away with these things. Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is, I'm trying to change the way that magicians think about magic. I'm trying to turn people from being magic trick owners into actually being conjurers.
Yep.
And it is very, very difficult at this point in time. A lot of the people who take private sessions from me are guys in their late 40s and up who were interested in magic, as young men like Ben's age, coming out of high school and into college, but then they get out of that they get a wife, they get a family, they get a job, and all of a sudden there's no time for magic. And now they want to get back into it. Now the kids are out of the house, you know, everything is stable. They'd like to get back in, but magic has changed so profoundly in the last 36, 40 years with the explosion of products. They don't even know where to start. And so a lot of what I do in private sessions is just keeping things focused, which is what I'd like to do in these courses. You have a defined set of things that you should practice. We have practice logs so you can get that kind of thing. I talk about the emphasis of metronomic practice to begin to understand the inherent rhythm that a magic performance requires. And in that way, I hope magicians can be more discerning in the things that they, you know, they decide to learn. You know, it's not a matter of I was going to write something about this because I grew, you know, when I really started learning things, well, you know, getting some really dexterity when I was 12 or 13, probably. One big book a year is probably what came out, published magic wise then, maybe two, not very many. Very limited amount of stuff. But Magic Secrets, I sort of got grooves. I was in it at the tail end of Magic Secrets being really held tightly. So at that point, you were really more of an apprentice master kind of situation in that kind of casual way. And because when I met Harry Reiser, he didn't sit me down and go, well, here's what you need to know, and here's what you need to know, and here's what you need to know. We talked, we shared an interest in a love of jazz. Harry was a huge expert on big band jazz, so we had that to talk about. But the first time we met, he did one effect. He had me cut it a card, look at it, bury it in some way or another, and then he found that card. And he did it over and over and over, maybe a half a dozen, 8 times or something like that during the course of a 3-hour visit. And then I got ready to leave. It was, you know, like 10 o'clock or so, and, you know, time to wrap it up. And I'm getting ready to go. And he goes, hey, hang on, let me show you one more thing. And I said, okay. And he said, he shuffled up the cards. He set them on the table. He said, cut, look at it. So I did, 3 of hearts. He said, bury it. So I lifted up a half and I buried it. And he goes, shuffle them. Really? Yeah, shuffle them. So boy, did I shuffle them. I mean, I really shuffled them. Gave him back to him. He took it and went, pulled one out. Said, what was your card? I said, 3 of hearts. It's the 3 of hearts. Good night. Out the door I go. Over the next maybe 6 months, we talked about all of the things, you know, that he had done that night, you know, because he was,
Wow.
what I did was I proved myself to him. I showed him that I respected the information he was giving me, and I tried to use it intelligently. I tried to apply it in ways that showed him that I was thinking about it. But he didn't just tell me everything.
Yep.
But after about 6 months, 8 months, I don't remember how long it was, I said, you know, we've talked about every version that you did for me that night, except the one where you let me shuffle the deck. How did that work? He said, oh, I used a one-way deck. And I looked at him, I said, what? He said, you have to earn the right to use gaffed cards. And I went, oh, okay.
Wow.
Lesson,
That's awesome.
lesson given, lesson absorbed.
It's phenomenal.
So
Wow.
it is this way of thinking about magic that I do not find in much of what's going on in North America at this point in time. And in a lot of magic. I mean, we are reduced to 45-second and 60-second things that are done only for that, and which probably only look good when I orient myself toward that thing. I'm very, very tired of people exposing tricks that they did not invent.
Mm-hmm.
I'm really tired of that, as if that makes you knowledgeable in some way. Unless you have said to me, I mean, you will get some really good secrets in this course, but you've paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
You have paid for that information. You know, if I was in a financial situation where I could mentor every single person who wants help, I would love to be able to do that. Unfortunately, at my age and the fact that I don't want to go out, I don't want to go out on I cannot go out on a lecture tour at this point in time. Not because I'm physically unable to do it, but just I don't want to talk to magicians that way. I don't want to stand in front of a group of people with something that's so watered down that everybody who's in the room will be able to not do the trick that they like, but to fantasize about doing the trick that they like. This is one of my more unpopular opinions, which is that if you want a best-selling trick, it doesn't have to be so simple a magic hobbyist can do it. It has to be so simple that they can fantasize that they can do it.
It's very interesting.
Wow. Because I've spent enough time with these guys. No, that's not what it was at all. It was just telling me that the drugs are worn off.
So tell me this: if somebody wants one of these lessons, how in the world how do they contact you? How does this go?
It's very, very arcane, and it's
chisel.
Reminds me of that joke about trying to find the meaning of freight. No, never mind. Anyway, so you go to michaelclose.com, and there's a thing that says lessons. And under that, there's a little drop-down menu. We're starting the Explorer classes. Now, you can't take the second Explorer class unless you've gone through the first one, because I build on what we've taught. So we're starting a new series of those on July 11, which is a Saturday. The Explorer 1 is at 1 o'clock. The Explorer 2 is at 3 o'clock. And you just slap down some dough and you're in.
That's amazing.
And the private sessions are there as well. So it's very simple. And guys have been, it's in much the same way as my world opened up when Harry Reiser said to me, you have to earn the right to use gaffed cards. I think that the curtain gets lifted big time for a lot of people as they go through this thing, because it's simply a way of thinking about things that nobody is talking about. I mean, information is so easy to get now. What you don't know is it the right information? Is it correct? How much does this guy know? Go to YouTube and put Elmsley count tutorial. What do you get? Maybe 20,000 videos, something like that, 10,000 videos. They can't all be right. I mean, are they talking about, for all the Elmsley count videos that are on there, does anybody actually mention the fact that if I want to prove to you that I have 4 cards here, I should do that? I mean, if I say I've got 4 fingers, I don't count them like this. I hold them up like this and you see I got 4 fingers.
Yeah.
So that's the aspect of the Elmsley count that makes no freaking sense at all. So it can make sense, but you have to change what it is that you're trying to imply by that demonstration. Show me a YouTube video that talks about that.
Right.
Yep.
I'll wait.
That's amazing. That's awesome. Wow. You folks, you could not get instruction.
See, and we only got through 2 questions. 2 questions.
That is the thoroughness that you approach your lessons with as well. Folks, I mean, this is one of those no-brainers. If you love the art of magic, if you love thinking about it at this higher level where everything is motivated and everything makes sense and it all comes together, then there's no better person to learn from than Michael Close. And the website again is michaelclose.com. Is that correct?
That's it. MICHAELCLOSE.com. Yep.
Perfect.
That's
perfect.
It.
Wow.
That's it.
Well, Michael, I mean, I feel like we could talk forever, but I'm just very thankful that you chose to spend the last hour with us and just sharing. I mean, so much great stuff. And this is one of those that when we chop it up and put like little snippets.
We can't sign off just yet, though.
Oh,
and I apologize.
Give it to me. Oh, yeah. Come on, bring it on.
Scott, you never got a chance to ask a question.
No, I didn't. I was actually, Jason stole my question around teaching. So I was just listening, and I have 2 pages of notes. The question that I would ask that I do
Okay.
have noted here, if there's time, and answer it lightning round, Michael, if you like, is between your work as a performer, a lecturer in the past, and now in this consulting producing role on Foolus. I can't even imagine, and obviously having performed and attended your fair share of conventions through your life, I can't even imagine how many different routines, acts, effects you have seen live or through the camera in your career. Specifically thinking through the Foolus filter, but you can go broader than that. It's a kind of a cliche question, but I'd be fascinated. I think you've alluded to a lot of the answers already. Common issues, challenges that you see in magic that could be better. I mean, you've already talked about motivation in terms of not
Sure.
just the how, but the why and some of those things. Maybe beyond what we've talked about so far, what would you see as the common issues or
Yeah.
challenges or shortcomings?
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, there's several things that happen right away now. One is clarity of effect.
Yeah.
A lot of people think that if you want to fool Penn and Teller, you've got to do something complex. They won't be able to follow this and this and this. So you've got complex procedures or the jamming together, Derek Dingle style of not only does the cards shuffled face up and down, but they write themselves and the backs all change colors. Or even worse, the rollover aces trick, where not only does this happen, but then I produce the aces. Now the deck straightens out, and those aren't just the aces, they're four royal flushes. So a lot of times, what I try to do is to say, pick one, pick
Hmm.
one of these effects and let that be the effect. So that's a problem that I see a lot. Um, the inability to craft an effective script and to present a trick in a way that catches attention. Remember, your patter doesn't have to be funny, but it has to be engaging.
No.
You know, entertainment does not mean comedy. Entertainment can mean things other than comedy, but it has to be engaging. And in particular on television, where if the viewer is not particularly engrossed in what you're saying, the means of escape is a quarter of an inch away on the remote. That's very important. The biggest problem I see right now is over reliance on one or two methods of doing a trick. So I'm a big, I'm not a huge fan of the way close-up magic has developed in terms of convention acts, convention contest acts, where to me it's a stage act done at a table to
Mhm.
music.
Right.
That to me doesn't feel like close-up magic, because I've always felt that the thing that made close-up magic interesting, and particular if you're going to judge magic, and I am not a fan of judging art. I can judge a foot race, you can judge a basketball game, you can judge a baseball game, but you cannot judge whether this piano player is better than this piano player, because that is not objective, that is subjective. Why do we do it? Because human beings need to know this guy's the winner.
Yeah.
What a stupid way to live. And consequently, um, you know, these acts have relied more and more and more on these tables that do very interesting things. And they use interesting things like threads and interesting things like black art and stuff like that. Interesting things like throwing things into your lap and retrieving things from your lap and from behind the table and what have you. Those methods can be used sparingly and they are effective. But if it's the only method you use in a trick,
Yeah.
it may look okay when you do it on stage at a magic convention and they're shooting it with a, commercially, what do they call it, a consumer level video camera and projecting it on a screen that's not high resolution. But you
Right.
bring that on Fool Us, where we shoot it in 4K with 9 cameras, and
Yep.
all of a sudden, what you think is mysterious looks like a marionette show. So it changes. Um, I've been working with a couple of acts, getting them ready for Fool Us, because we are in the pre-production phase of season 12. Um, the principles that Slidini established as far as using the lap are completely forgotten at this point in time. Nobody remembers how and why his hands and his body were in the places that they had to be deceptive. And you know, these especially when you eliminate misdirection as well, then it all comes. So that would be the other problem that I see, is this over reliance on one or two techniques. Now they may be eye-catching. I mean, black art is certainly a very eye-catching thing. I mean, you guys are too young, but I don't know if you ever saw Omar Pasha, because that was a guy who told you what the act was in the title of it. I mean, what are you going to go see? I'm going to go see Omar Pasha and his black art act. I wonder how that works. Oh, yeah. But even though you knew, and you knew that something was going on, because the lighting just came, it got completely dark, and everything was kind of a luminescent or phosphorescent, the costumes and everything. So I mean, it was the original eye candy, really. It was just fantastic. I suppose the other thing that I find a little not frustrating, but I should say it's unfortunate, is this reliance on eye candy type of things. You know, these eye-popping things that you do, and it looks good for this camera and no other camera. And the problem is that nothing that is profoundly, mysteriously memorable can happen if your eyes are the only things that are involved. If I say to you, tell me about the last fireworks display you saw. Well, stuff went up in the sky and exploded, and there was different color, and that's all you can get. It happens too fast. If you want someone to be deeply, deeply fooled, then you need to have the brain involved. The brain has to make that decision that I am deceived. That's what makes the decision. And I guess I'll wrap this all up with, and here's the reason why. At my age, I do not want what I show you to be dismissed immediately. I want it to stay with you for as long as it can. I've changed my idea about what I think magicians are. You know, we talk about the term storytelling, and the magicians are storytellers. Well, yes, we can use a story to engage the spectators and to give meaning, perhaps, to the actions that occur. I think our job as magicians is to turn spectators into storytellers. We are the experience. We are the astonishing experience that we give them, and they walk away from that with a clear, astonishing story to tell their friends. And that's what our job is. And there are only so many ways to accomplish that. And one of them is not appealing to the eyes only. And that's all as Forrest Gump says, that's all I got to say about that.
Wow.
Thank you, Michael.
That is
Thank you for making sure I got to
amazing.
ask a question.
Well, I realized you were so gracious there, Scott. I mean, it
Did
was
you
that
hear
and the
that,
fact
guys?
that
I
you
was
kept waving
gracious.
your freaking hand
No,
the whole time and nobody
he
called
cut
on you.
out when he said
You were
that
going,
about
you were
you.
going,
Yeah.
me, call on me. It's like, God, I had one night of illusions, and I said, what is it about Hoosier audiences that you all think you're supposed to answer rhetorical questions? The guy went, I know. You know, it's just,
That's great.
anyway,
Oh my gosh.
just an old man rambling on. So there you go.
Oh my gosh.
Love it.
Folks,
Thank you, Michael.
the website is michaelclose.com. That is where you want to go. And that is where you want to go ahead and get yourself enrolled in those Explorers
Hey, by the way,
1 and 2.
when do you think this is going to when will this air?
This will air on July 1st, 2 days from now.
Great. Lovely.
Yep.
Perfect.
Absolutely.
Well, gentlemen, it's great to see both you again, Jason and Ben, and nice to see you, Scott. It's been a pleasure.
Yes, sir.
It's been our
I
pleasure.
had a lot of fun. Like Billy McComb used to say, this will be brief. It's rice pudding night at the home.
Well, thanks, folks, for listening. This has been the I.B.M. podcast. We've had special guest Michael Close on. We will talk more, and we will have more conversations, and we will have, in the very next episode, we're going to go over all the last details that you need to know about the I.B.M. convention, which is coming up in St. Louis at the end of July. For more information about the IBM, check out magician.org. That is magician.org. My name is Jason Michaels. Ben Young, Scott Cantrell, my co-host, our special guest, Michael Close. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.